April 8, 1943. 27,000 feet above Caen, France. The oxygen mask couldn't hide Oberleutnant Ralph Hermachen's smirk as he watched the ungainly silhouettes climbing laboriously toward his formation through the crystal-clear canopy of his Focke-Wulf 190. The veteran ace studied the American fighters making their combat debut over occupied Europe. "They've sent us flying milk bottles," he transmitted to his wingman, unable to suppress his laughter at the sight of the massive Republic P-47 Thunderbolts struggling for altitude. Below them, 16 P-47C Thunderbolts of the 4th Fighter Group lumbered upward in tight formation, their 2,000 horsepower engines straining against their 7-ton weight. To German pilots accustomed to sleek Spitfires and nimble Soviet fighters, these corpulent American machines appeared almost comical. But within 18 months, those same German pilots would refuse to engage Thunderbolts without a 3-to-1 numerical advantage. What transformed the Luftwaffe's favorite target into the aircraft they feared most? The answer would be written in blood: aluminum, and a demonstration of American industrial power that would break the back of the greatest air force ever assembled. The mockery wasn't limited to the Germans. When the first P-47s arrived in England in late 1942, British RAF pilots joked that the cockpit was so roomy you could run laps around it to evade enemy fire. The barrel-shaped fuselage topped with a greenhouse canopy made it look more like a transport aircraft than a fighter. Its wings seemed absurdly small for its massive body, and the long nose stretched forward like an elephant's trunk. American pilots themselves struggled with the beast during training, resulting in 18 pilots losing their lives before a single Thunderbolt ever saw combat. The aircraft's reputation hit rock bottom in March 1943, when the 56th Fighter Group flew their first combat missions. In 30 days of operations, they lost 14 Thunderbolts, while only managing to shoot down 3 German fighters. Luftwaffe intelligence officers labeled the P-47 as a minimal threat and advised their pilots to engage with confidence. German ace Joseph Pips Priller reportedly told his squadron the Thunderbolts were meat for slaughter, just approach from behind and they fall like stones. But what the Germans didn't know was that they were making a catastrophic miscalculation. The P-47 Thunderbolt was the brainchild of Alexander Kartveli, a Georgian immigrant who described his design philosophy as creating a dinosaur with good proportions. The specifications were shocking by any standard. The aircraft weighed 9,900 pounds empty, making it 65% heavier than the P-40 Warhawk it was meant to replace. For context, that's like comparing a pickup truck to a sedan, except this pickup truck was supposed to dogfight. But buried inside that enormous fuselage was technology that would revolutionize air combat. The massive Pratt & Whitney R2800 double Wasp engine produced 2,000 horsepower, but that wasn't the secret weapon. The real game changer was the turbo supercharger, a device that allowed the engine to maintain full power at altitudes where German fighters gasped for air. While Messerschmitt 1M09s and Focke-Wulf 1-90s saw their performance drop dramatically above 25,000 feet, the P-47 was just getting started. At 27,000 feet, where German pilots struggled to maintain consciousness, the Thunderbolt operated at peak efficiency. And then there was the armament. 8 50 caliber machine guns, each loaded with 350 rounds, capable of firing 6,000 rounds per minute combined. When all 8 guns converged on a target, the result wasn't just destruction, it was complete disintegration. But the Germans would need to see it to believe it. June 26, 1943. Lieutenant Robert Johnson flew as Tail End Charlie in the 61st Squadron formation, the most vulnerable position typically assigned to newer pilots. His P-47C carried the name Half Pint on its cowling, a reference to his compact 5'6" frame. The formation was escorting B-17 bombers returning from a raid on Villacoublay airfield near Paris, when 16 Focke-Wulf 190s dove from above. The first indication of attack came from exploding ammunition. 21 20mm cannon shells ripped through Johnson's fuselage in the first 2 seconds. The instrument panel exploded into fragments. The canopy shattered, showering him with glass. Hydraulic fluid sprayed into the cockpit, partially blinding him. A cannon shell fragment sliced across his nose, opening a gash that immediately filled with blood. Machine gun bullets punctured the oxygen system, and fire erupted behind the engine cowling as fuel lines ruptured. Johnson's P-47 rolled inverted and entered a spin, the centrifugal force pressing him against the shattered canopy. The altimeter unwound through 20,000 feet as Johnson fought for control. Through sheer instinct and desperation, he managed to pull out of the spin at 15,000 feet. The fire, miraculously, had gone out on its own. Johnson tried to bail out, but his parachute had snagged on wreckage inside the cockpit. The damaged canopy would only slide open about 6 inches, not nearly enough to escape. He was trapped inside a dying aircraft, bleeding and half-blind, heading for the English Channel. But his nightmare was just beginning. A single Focke-Wulf 190 intercepted Johnson over the channel. Unable to fight back with his damaged aircraft, Johnson could only maneuver defensively while the German pilot methodically worked to finish him off. The FW-190 made pass after pass, each time stitching Johnson's aircraft with 7.92mm machine gun rounds and 20mm cannon shells. Johnson counted the attacks, 5, 6, 7 passes. His aircraft absorbed hundreds of additional hits. Pieces of aluminum skin peeled away and tumbled through the air. The tail section looked like Swiss cheese. The wings flexed and bent with each maneuver, threatening to snap off entirely. Still, impossibly, the Pratt Whitney engine continued running. On the 8th pass, something changed. The German pilot pulled alongside Johnson's shattered Thunderbolt and held formation. Through the smoke and hydraulic fluid coating his canopy, Johnson could see the German pilot staring at him. The pilot rocked his wings in a salute, a gesture of respect between warriors, then peeled away and headed back toward France. He had expended every round of ammunition trying to bring down the P-47 and failed. Research suggests the pilot was likely Oberst Egon Mayer, commander of 3 JG-2 and a highly respected ace. Johnson coaxed his devastated aircraft across the channel and landed at RAF Manston. When ground crews approached the aircraft, they stopped counting the bullet holes after reaching 200, and that was without even walking around the entire plane. Johnson had taken 21 20mm cannon hits and over 200 machine gun strikes. By all logic, he should have died within the first 5 seconds of the attack. Instead, he walked away with minor shrapnel wounds and burns. This single incident fundamentally changed how both sides viewed the P-47 Thunderbolt. The story of Johnson's survival reached American fighter groups within days and German intelligence within weeks. American pilots began pushing their Thunderbolts harder, trusting the aircraft's structural integrity in ways they never had before. But more importantly, tactical doctrine began to evolve. Colonel Hubert Zemke, commander of the 56th Fighter Group, studied the P-47's capabilities and realized everyone had been flying it wrong. The Thunderbolt wasn't designed to turn and twist in dogfights with nimble German fighters. Its weight, which everyone considered a fatal flaw, was actually its greatest advantage. The 7-ton mass allowed the P-47 to dive faster than any fighter in the sky, reaching speeds of 550 miles per hour in a full power dive. Zemke developed the boom and zoom tactics that would define American fighter doctrine for the rest of the war. P-47s would patrol at 30,000 feet, above the operational ceiling of German fighters, using their turbo superchargers to breathe easily in the thin air. When they spotted enemy aircraft below, they would dive at full throttle, shred their targets with 850 caliber machine guns, then use their speed and momentum to climb back to altitude before the Germans could react. The Luftwaffe suddenly found themselves in an impossible position. They couldn't climb high enough to challenge the Thunderbolts, and when the Americans dove, no aircraft in the German inventory could catch them. It was like being hunted by eagles when you're built to be a sparrow. Major David Schilling provided the first spectacular demonstration of the new tactics on August 17, 1943. His flight of 4 P-47s caught a formation of 8 Messerschmitt Me 110 heavy fighters at 28,000 feet. The Me 110s never saw them coming. Schilling dove from 32,000 feet, building speed until his aircraft shook and rattled from compressibility effects. He opened fire at 600 yards, and his target simply disintegrated. The convergence of 850 caliber machine guns created a cone of destruction that no aircraft could survive. Pieces of the Me-110's wings and fuselage separated and tumbled through the air. Schilling pulled up, climbed back to altitude using his excess speed, then repeated the attack. In under 60 seconds, he destroyed 3 Me-110s. His wingmen accounted for 5 more. The entire engagement lasted less than 2 minutes, and not a single P-47 sustained any damage. German survivors reported the attack to their intelligence officers, but their description seemed so unbelievable that it was initially dismissed as combat stress. Aircraft didn't just disintegrate from machine gun fire, but the evidence was undeniable. The Me-110 unit had lost 8 aircraft in 2 minutes without scoring a single hit on their attackers. Luftwaffe tactical manuals were quietly updated with a new warning: avoid engagement with P-47 at altitude. Disengage immediately if bounced from above. The aircraft they had mocked 6 months earlier was now dictating the terms of air combat over Europe. Between August and October 1943, something unprecedented began happening. German aces, pilots with 50, 100, even 200 aerial victories, started dying in combat with P-47s. These weren't rookie pilots making mistakes. These were the elite of the Luftwaffe, men who had survived years of combat on the eastern and western fronts. But the high-altitude advantage of the P-47 negated their experience. On October 8, 1943, Oberstleutnant Hans Philipp, commander of Jagdgeschwader 1 and holder of 206 confirmed victories, led his unit against American bombers near Wielen. Philipp was one of the most respected fighter leaders in the Luftwaffe, a recipient of the Knight's Cross, with oak leaves and swords. He positioned his Bf-109s to attack the bomber formation from below when P-47 Thunderbolts of the 56th Fighter Group dove from 30,000 feet. Reports suggest Robert Johnson, the same pilot who had survived the impossible in June, may have been the one who hit Phillips' aircraft, though defensive fire from a B-17 rear gunner was also claimed as the cause. What's certain is that Phillips' aircraft took critical hits and caught fire. He attempted to return to his base, but was forced to bail out at extremely low altitude, around 160 feet. His parachute failed to deploy in time, and he was mortally wounded upon impact. The death of Philipp sent shockwaves through the Luftwaffe. If a pilot of his caliber couldn't survive against the Thunderbolts, what chance did anyone else have? Josef Priller, who had called P-47s meat for slaughter just months earlier, reportedly told his pilots after Philipp's death, "The Americans have learned to use their heavy fighter. Engage only with numerical superiority and altitude advantage, or don't engage at all." January 1944 brought another upgrade that terrified the Germans, the paddle blade propeller. The original P-47s used standard narrow blade propellers that limited their climb rate. The new paddle blade design increased blade surface area by nearly 30%, and the results were staggering. Climb rate improved by 36%, taking the P-47 from ground level to 30,000 feet in under 12 minutes. More importantly, acceleration in combat improved dramatically. German pilots who had relied on briefly outclimbing Thunderbolts during engagements suddenly found P-47s staying with them through every maneuver. The psychological impact was devastating. Luftwaffe pilots began experiencing what German military doctors termed Jabo fever, a stress-induced illness characterized by anxiety attacks, insomnia, and physical tremors at the sound of aircraft engines. Frontline fighter units reported pilots requesting transfers to bomber or transport units, positions traditionally considered more dangerous. The reasoning was simple. You might get shot down flying bombers, but at least you could see it coming. With P-47s, death arrived at 550 miles per hour from directly above, faster than human reflexes could respond. German fighter production actually increased during this period, with factories churning out Bf-109s and Fw-190s at record rates. But pilot quality plummeted. Training time was cut from 2 years to 6 months, then to 3 months as casualties mounted. Inexperienced pilots lasted an average of 2 weeks in combat against veteran American P-47 units. The Thunderbolt wasn't just winning the air war, it was systematically destroying the Luftwaffe's ability to train replacements. But the real story wasn't just about the P-47's capabilities. It was about American industrial superiority on a scale the Germans couldn't comprehend. Between 1942 and 1945, American factories produced 15,183 P-47 Thunderbolts. At peak production, Republic Aviation's Farmingdale, New York facility completed one P-47 every 60 minutes, 24 hours a day. Each aircraft contained 65,000 individual parts, 8 miles of electrical wiring, and required precision machining to tolerances of 1,000th of an inch. The logistics were staggering. American factories consumed 10 million rounds of 50 caliber ammunition monthly just to feed the P-47 fleet. The United States graduated 30,000 new pilots every year, while Germany's entire remaining pilot training program produced fewer than 5,000 annually. When P-47s were lost in combat, replacement aircraft arrived within days, sometimes hours. Replacement pilots with hundreds of hours of training time filled vacant positions immediately. Joseph Priller, by then one of the most senior German fighter commanders still alive, wrote in a 1945 assessment, "It doesn't matter how many we shoot down. They lose 10 aircraft, they build 20 more. They lose a pilot, 3 replacements arrive the next day. We lose 1 aircraft, 1 pilot, and they're gone forever. This isn't a war anymore. It's industrial slaughter." The statement revealed the fundamental truth that broke the Luftwaffe. They weren't just fighting American pilots flying American aircraft. They were fighting the entire American industrial machine, and that was a battle no amount of skill or courage could win. January 1st, 1945. Operation Bodenplatte, Germany's last desperate attempt to destroy Allied air power. The Luftwaffe assembled nearly 900 fighters, every operational aircraft they could scrape together from across Germany. The plan was to launch surprise attacks against Allied airfields in Belgium, Holland, and France, destroying Allied aircraft on the ground before they could take off. German pilots took off in pre-dawn darkness, flying at low altitude to avoid radar detection. At approximately 8:30 a.m., the attacks began. At Metz Frascati Airfield, Jagdgeschwader 53 caught the 9th Air Force completely by surprise. They strafed parked aircraft with cannon and machine gun fire, setting off massive secondary explosions as fuel tanks detonated. When the attack ended 15 minutes later, 22 P-47 Thunderbolts had been destroyed on the ground, with another 11 damaged. The Germans celebrated what appeared to be a stunning success. But the celebration was premature and would turn into a nightmare. During the attack on Metz, JG-53 lost 30 aircraft out of 80 that participated, a 48% loss rate. Many were shot down by their own anti-aircraft guns, as German flak batteries hadn't been informed of the operation and fired on any low-flying aircraft. Others were caught by American P-47s that managed to scramble despite the surprise attack. Across all targets, the Luftwaffe lost 271 aircraft and 213 pilots, including 22 unit commanders. It was a catastrophic loss of experienced leadership that the German Air Force could never replace. The final toll of Operation Bodenplatte revealed the fundamental disparity between the two air forces. The Luftwaffe had destroyed approximately 150 Allied aircraft, most of them on the ground. But within 48 hours, every single lost Allied aircraft had been replaced with a factory-fresh plane flown in from England or directly from the United States. The 213 German pilots lost, however, represented years of combat experience and training that couldn't be replaced. Many of the surviving German units never recovered from the losses. JG-1 was effectively destroyed as a fighting force, losing 29 aircraft and 25 pilots in a single morning. Several Jagdgeschwader were disbanded entirely, their remaining pilots and aircraft absorbed into other units to maintain even minimal operational strength. American assessment reports from January 1945 noted with clinical precision, German fighter opposition has ceased to be a significant factor in air operations. Remaining Luftwaffe units engage only when absolutely necessary and disengage at first opportunity. The transformation was complete. The Luftwaffe that had terrorized Europe from 1939 to 1943 had been systematically destroyed, and the P-47 Thunderbolt had been the primary instrument of that destruction. The flying milk bottles that German pilots had mocked in April 1943 were now virtually uncontested masters of European skies. The sound of 850 caliber machine guns firing simultaneously became known among German soldiers as Roosevelt's piano, after President Franklin Roosevelt. Once you heard it, veterans said, you never forgot it. The sound meant death was coming at 550 miles per hour, and there was nothing you could do to stop it. German anti-aircraft crews learned to recognize the silhouette of approaching P-47s and often abandoned their positions rather than face the inevitable destruction that followed. The psychological dominance was so complete that by March 1945, Wehrmacht field commanders reported their troops refusing to move during daylight hours regardless of orders. The Luftwaffe's assessment of the P-47 evolved from minimal threat in March 1943 to avoid engagement in October 1943 to survival unlikely in direct engagement by December 1944. Adolf Galland, general of the fighter arm and one of Germany's most successful aces, admitted after the war, "We made a terrible mistake in 1943. We saw the P-47's size and weight and assumed it would be easy prey. We didn't understand that the Americans had engineered solutions to problems we didn't know existed. By the time we realized our error, it was too late. The sky belonged to the Thunderbolt, and we couldn't take it back. The final tally tells the story with brutal clarity. P-47. Thunderbolts were credited with destroying 3,752 German aircraft in air-to-air combat during the European theater. Ground attack missions accounted for thousands more locomotives, tanks, vehicles, and installations. American P-47 units lost approximately 3,500 aircraft to all causes, combat and operational, but the impact of those losses was negligible. Replacement aircraft and pilots arrived continuously, maintaining American strength at consistent levels throughout the war. The Luftwaffe, conversely, never recovered from the losses inflicted during 1943 and 1944. By May 1945, the once mighty German Air Force had been reduced to scattered units flying obsolete aircraft with minimal fuel and ammunition. The laughter that echoed through German radio channels in April 1943, when Oberleutnant Hermachen called the P-47s flying milk bottles, had long since faded to silence. The thunder had spoken, the sky belonged to America, and the war was over.